My name is Captain Bella Mills, 29 years old, an officer in the United States Army. I've faced enemy fire, but nothing could have prepared me for the ambush in DC's most exclusive steakhouse that night. Amid the clinking of crystal, my father, Howard Anderson, looked at me with ice in his eyes and declared, "The family has decided to remove you from the will. You chose that little military life, and you are no longer an Anderson." My mother smiled faintly behind her silk napkin, while my brother smirked. They raised their champagne glasses, turning my public humiliation into a family celebration. They made one fatal mistake. They thought they were attacking a daughter, but they forgot they had just declared war on an officer trained to expose men exactly like them. If you have ever been made to feel like an outsider by your own family, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, because this is the story of how one soldier taught a corrupt empire the true meaning of loyalty. The air in the private dining room of the Capitol Grill was thick, a suffocating blend of my father's Macallan 25 and my mother's Chanel No. 5. It was the scent of manufactured power, a fragrance I had spent the last decade trying to wash from my memory. I stood in my Army service uniform, the deep blue jacket and crisp white shirt feeling like armor in a place that fought its wars with whispers and stock options. The room's dark mahogany walls seemed to absorb the light, reflecting only the polished gleam of old money and older secrets. The heavy leather chairs sighed as family members settled into them, their laughter echoing with a hollowness I knew all too well. They treated my return from a high-stakes deployment as if I'd been on a European backpacking trip. "Bella, darling, how was your trip?" my Aunt Carol asked, her eyes scanning my uniform as if it were a poorly chosen outfit for a gala. "Did you get a nice tan?" I offered a tight, disciplined smile. "It was productive, Aunt Carol. Not much sun." My father, Howard Anderson, clapped a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of affection, it was a branding, a public claim of ownership before his court. His voice, practiced for boardrooms and congressional hearings, boomed across the table. "To Bella's return," he announced, raising his glass. "It's good to have the whole family together." A chorus of polite applause followed. I saw the faces around the table, my younger brother, Kevin, already looking bored. My sister, Paige, subtly checking her reflection in the back of a spoon. My mother, Eleanor, playing the part of the gracious matriarch. For a split second, a foolish, treacherous flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe this time, I thought, it will be different. It was a hope I should have learned to extinguish years ago. The moment the toast ended, the atmosphere shifted. The mask of celebration fell from my father's face, replaced by the cold, transactional expression he reserved for hostile takeovers. He cleared his throat, a sound that instantly silenced all other conversation. The clinking of silverware stopped. Every eye turned to him. "Bella," he began, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "I'm glad you could make it. We have a family matter to discuss, and it's best we do it directly." He paused, letting the weight of the silence press down on me. "Effective immediately, the family has decided to remove you from the will. All trusts and inheritances tied to the Anderson name will be redistributed." The words hung in the air, clinical and brutal. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a corporate decree. I felt the blood drain from my face, but my training kicked in. My posture remained rigid, my gaze fixed on him. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. To drive the knife in deeper, my mother leaned forward, her voice a silky, venomous whisper. "Darling," she said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "We simply can't have a common Mills name diluting the Anderson legacy. It's a matter of brand integrity." She looked at my uniform, a flicker of disdain in her eyes. "Besides, that uniform, while patriotic, I suppose, doesn't really fit the family brand. It's a bit severe." Her words were a secondary explosion, more damaging than the first. They weren't just taking my inheritance, they were attacking my identity, my service, the one thing I had built for myself with sweat and sacrifice. They were calling my life's work, my honor, a common and severe choice that embarrassed them. Their pronouncement was a signal, and the pack moved in for the kill. My brother Kevin, the golden boy heir apparent, leaned back in his chair with a smug grin. "Hey, don't worry about it, Bella," he said, his tone dripping with condescending pity. "I'm sure a captain's salary is enough to get by, right?" Across the table, my sister Paige whispered loudly to her friend, just loud enough for me to hear. "Finally, Mom and Dad are doing the right thing. It's about protecting our future." The final betrayal came from my uncle, a man who, just 2 years prior, had called me asking for advice on getting his own son into the military. He now nodded sagely at my father. "Howard, you've done the right thing," he declared, his voice full of false gravity. "Loyalty to the family must come first. It's a hard lesson, but a necessary one." In their eyes, I wasn't the victim, I was the traitor. They had twisted their cruelty into a moral lesson, and I was the villain of my own execution. They were celebrating not just my disinheritance, but the reaffirmation of their own closed, corrupt world. A world where loyalty was transactional and honor was just a brand. They expected me to break. They were waiting for the tears, the pleading, the angry outburst. It would have completed their ceremony, confirming their power over me. But they had forgotten who they were dealing with. I was not the lost little girl they remembered. I was an officer in the United States Army. My gaze swept across the table, a slow, deliberate scan. I met each of their eyes, cataloging every smirk, every flicker of satisfaction, every cowardly nod of agreement. I was no longer seeing family. I was identifying hostiles. With practiced precision, I placed my knife and fork together on my plate, perfectly parallel. I lifted the heavy linen napkin from my lap, folded it neatly into a crisp square, and placed it to the left of my plate. My movements were economical, silent, and final. Then, I stood. My spine was straight, my shoulders back. I looked directly at my father, the commander-in-chief of this ambush. My voice, when it came, was steady, level, and completely devoid of emotion. It was the same tone I used to acknowledge an order on the battlefield. "Roger that, sir," I said. "Thank you for the dinner." I turned, not with a storm of fury, but with the controlled grace of a soldier executing a maneuver. My polished dress shoes made sharp, rhythmic clicks on the hardwood floor as I walked out of the room, leaving behind a stunned, deafening silence. They had wanted to see me fall apart. Instead, they had just witnessed a perfect, tactical withdrawal. And the war had just begun. The tactical withdrawal ended the moment the door to my temporary apartment clicked shut behind me. The silence of the small, sterile space in Arlington was louder than the stunned quiet I'd left at the restaurant. My shoulders, held ramrod straight for hours, finally slumped. The adrenaline from the confrontation drained away, leaving a familiar, hollow ache in its place. I didn't cry. Crying felt like a luxury I hadn't earned and a weakness I couldn't afford. Instead, I moved with the methodical calm of routine. I unpinned the insignia from my uniform, placing each piece carefully into a velvet-lined box on my dresser. My eyes fell upon one particular item resting there, a small bronze-colored medal with a simple red, white, and blue ribbon. The Bronze Star. It wasn't shiny or ostentatious. It was heavy, both in my hand and in my memory. Holding it, the present dissolved, and the ghosts of the past began to speak. It started with a dream. I was 18, and I held in my hand the thickest envelope I had ever seen. The letterhead read, United States Military Academy at West Point. It wasn't just an acceptance letter, it was my ticket out. It was validation. It was the beginning of a life defined by honor and purpose, a stark contrast to the Anderson world of profit margins and social maneuvering. I remember sitting on my bed, tracing the embossed seal with my finger, feeling a sense of belonging for the very first time. My dream was born on a Tuesday morning in September when I was a teenager. I watched the second tower fall on a classroom television, and something inside me shifted forever. A profound, unshakable need to serve settled deep in my bones. For my family, the tragedy of 9/11 was a business opportunity. For me, it was a call to duty. That acceptance letter was the culmination of that calling. But my timing was inconvenient for my father. Anderson Defense was facing a temporary cash flow problem, he'd explained, his face a mask of paternal concern. He asked me to defer my admission for 1 year to come work in the company's accounting department. Just to help the family stabilize things, Bella, he'd said. We need all hands on deck. Driven by a daughter's sense of duty, a loyalty he so easily discarded tonight, I agreed. I put my life on hold to help my family. A month into the job, while running some internal expense reports, I found the truth. There was no cash flow problem. My tuition and living expenses, already set aside in a trust, had been liquidated. The same week, my brother Kevin, on his 16th birthday, was handed the keys to a brand new Porsche 911. I confronted my father in his office, the printout shaking in my hand. He didn't deny it. He simply took a sip of his scotch and looked at me as if I were a naive child. The Porsche is an investment in the future CEO of this company, he said, his voice cold. Your West Point idea is an expensive hobby. The sting of that humiliation felt fresh again as I placed the bronze star back on the dresser. The medal wasn't just a piece of metal, it was proof that my hobby had value. I had earned it during a particularly brutal tour for actions that still visited me in my sleep. I returned home on leave, wearing it on my dress uniform, hoping, stupidly, for a glimmer of pride in their eyes. My mother was hosting one of her DC society parties. The air was thick with political gossip and expensive perfume. She introduced me to a senator's wife with a dismissive wave of her hand. This is my daughter, Bella, she'd said. She works for the government. The woman's eyes landed on the medal pinned to my chest. Oh my, what's that? She asked with genuine curiosity. My mother laughed, a light tinkling sound that made my blood run cold. Oh, that, she said, as if it were a piece of costume jewelry. It's just a little trinket they give out to the employees. A thank you for their time, I think. A trinket. The weight of my actions, the lives of the soldiers I fought alongside, the sleepless nights, and the constant threat of danger, all of it reduced to a party favor. I stood there, a decorated officer in a room full of powerful people, and felt completely and utterly invisible. The only person who ever saw me was my grandmother. Grandma Mills. During the hell of basic training, when my body was bruised and my spirit was frayed to a thread, a small package would arrive every single week without a return address. Inside, there would be a Ziploc bag of her homemade chocolate chip cookies, the kind that were still a little soft in the middle, and a small handwritten note on a piece of scrap paper. It always said the same thing. Stay strong, my Mills girl. Those cookies were more than just a taste of home. They were a lifeline. They were a quiet rebellion against the Anderson name. They were a reminder that someone, somewhere, saw my path, not as a disgrace, but as a source of pride. My grandmother was the reason I legally changed my last name to Mills the day I graduated. It was my way of honoring the only true loyalty I had ever known. The Andersons, of course, saw it as the ultimate act of betrayal. A final memory surfaced, unbidden. It was from that year I'd spent in my father's accounting department. He'd come into the office late one night, smelling of whiskey and self-satisfaction after closing a major government contract. He was in a boastful mood. He pulled me over to his computer, showing me complex spreadsheets and shell corporations registered in Delaware and Panama. He laughed, a low, conspiratorial chuckle. Rules are for the little people, Bella Anderson, he'd slurred, his finger tracing a line of multi-million-dollar transactions. Smart people make their own rules. He thought he was teaching me about power. He thought he was showing me how the world really worked. He had no idea that he was handing me a weapon. He was giving his daughter, an accounting specialist with a soldier's unwavering moral code, the very blueprint to his own destruction. I looked around my empty apartment. The ghosts of the past retreated, leaving behind not just pain, but clarity. My father was right. Smart people did make their own rules, and I, Captain Bella Mills, was about to write a new one for the Anderson Empire. From my apartment window in Arlington, I could see the distant, formidable shape of the Pentagon. It was a constant reminder of the oath I took, a silent witness to the mission that was now unfolding. Grief is a luxury a soldier cannot afford in the middle of a battle. and I was in the middle of a battle. I didn't allow the hollow ache from the restaurant to fester. I compartmentalized it. I took the pain and anger, packed them down into a tight, dense core of energy, and stored them away. They would be the fuel. My body moved on instinct, following a familiar post-mission protocol. First, the uniform. I unbuttoned the service jacket, slid it off my shoulders, and hung it with ceremonial care. It was more than fabric. It was a symbol of everything the Andersons despised and everything I had become. Next, a cold shower. I stood under the icy spray until my skin prickled and my mind was sharp, washing away the lingering scent of my mother's perfume and the stale air of their lies. By the time I sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room, the transformation was complete. I was no longer Bella Mills, the disowned daughter. I was Captain Mills, a forensic accounting specialist for the U.S. Army Finance Corps, and I was preparing for an operation. I powered on my government-issued Dell Latitude, a rugged, encrypted laptop that had survived dust storms in Iraq and humidity in places I wasn't allowed to name. The screen flickered to life, and I entered a complex series of passwords. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, navigating to a deeply buried, multi-layered encrypted folder. The folder was labeled Oplan B, Operation Plan Bravo, a contingency plan. Inside was a meticulously organized network of files, spreadsheets, scanned invoices, encrypted emails, and audio recordings of phone calls. It was my secret arsenal, a collection of evidence I had been gathering for the last 3 months, ever since a phone call from my mother. She had called me out of the blue, her voice dripping with an uncharacteristic sweetness that immediately set off my internal alarms. "Bella, darling," she'd cooed. "Could you do Mommy a tiny favor? I was just looking at some of the company's numbers, and a few things don't quite add up. You've always been so clever with this sort of thing." She saw me as a glorified bookkeeper, a low-level number cruncher who could tidy up some minor discrepancies. She and my father had always underestimated me, assuming my military career was for people who couldn't succeed in the real world. They had no concept of my actual job. My specialty wasn't just accounting, it was hunting. I was trained by the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, DFAS, to hunt for fraud, waste, and abuse in the most complex multi-billion-dollar defense contracts on the planet. My mother thought she was handing me a shoebox of receipts. She had unwittingly handed me the key to their entire corrupt kingdom. It took me less than a day to see the pattern. It was a classic, almost insultingly simple fraud scheme, scaled to an audacious level. I clicked open a file containing invoices for basic vehicle components. Bolts and screws for Humvees, items that cost less than $1 a piece, were being billed to the Pentagon at $50. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands of units, and the numbers became staggering. I followed the money. Massive payments were routed from Anderson Defense to a series of shell companies with addresses in Delaware and post office boxes in Panama. From there, the money was funneled back, laundered clean, into the pockets of top executives, disguised as performance bonuses. My father, my uncle, even my brother Kevin were all recipients. It was sickening, but it wasn't the worst of it. As I dug deeper, I found something that made my blood run cold. A separate set of documents, hidden within procurement logs, detailed the sourcing of materials for vehicle armor plating. I cross-referenced the supplier codes against the Department of Defense's approved vendor list. No match. The supplier was an unlicensed steel manufacturer out of Shanghai, known for producing substandard materials. Anderson Defense was knowingly using cheap, uncertified steel to build the armor on Humvees. They were putting American soldiers, my brothers and sisters in arms, inside vehicles with defective protection to skim an extra few $1 million in profit. The betrayal I felt at the dinner table was a shallow cut compared to this. This was a deep, mortal wound. They weren't just stealing taxpayer money. They were trading the lives of soldiers for a higher profit margin. My family's name, the legacy they were so desperate to protect, was built on the potential graves of my comrades. As I was organizing the files, cross-referencing a final set of wire transfers, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Bella?" The voice was frail, trembling with an emotion I couldn't place. It was my grandmother. "Grandma." "Oh, Bella, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I sat there tonight and I said nothing. I was a coward." "It's okay, Grandma. You don't have to." "No, listen to me," she interrupted, a new urgency in her tone. "There's something you need to know. The reason your father is doing this, the reason he's so vicious right now, he's desperate, he's terrified." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "The company," she said, her voice dropping lower. "They're being audited. A full-scale investigation by the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General, the DODOIG. It's been going on for weeks, very quietly. Howard is panicking. He's trying to consolidate power, to eliminate any loose ends, anyone he can't control." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "You, my dear," my grandmother said, her voice filled with a sad strength. "You are the one variable he could never, ever control." The call ended, but the information echoed in the silent room. This changed everything. The ambush at the restaurant wasn't a show of strength from a confident patriarch. It was a preemptive strike from a cornered animal. My father wasn't punishing me for choosing a different life. He was trying to neutralize a threat. I looked at the screen, at the damning evidence laid out in neat, orderly files. My objective, which had been a murky mix of self-preservation and anger, was now crystal clear. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The oath doesn't make an exception for family. This was no longer about personal revenge. This was about justice. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The intelligence my grandmother had provided changed my entire strategic assessment. My father wasn't just a tyrant, he was a wounded animal, backed into a corner by a DOD audit. This meant I had leverage, but my window of opportunity was shrinking. A legal battle would be slow, a war of attrition fought in expensive conference rooms, and my father owned that territory. I knew this war couldn't be won in a courtroom, not at first. It had to be won in the court of public opinion. I didn't call a lawyer. I opened my encrypted email client and drafted a message. It was addressed to Timothy Hayes. Anyone who followed investigative journalism in Washington knew the name. Hayes was a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the Washington Post, a grizzled, old-school newsman who had made a career out of exposing corruption in the defense industry. He was the closest thing this city had to a legendary dragon slayer, and I was about to walk into his lair and offer him a dragon. My email was short, precise, and professional. The subject line read, "Urgent, Anderson Defense." The body was just 2 sentences. "Mr. Hayes, I have irrefutable proof of large-scale contract fraud and endangerment of U.S. troops at Anderson Defense. Source is internal. Requesting an in-person meeting at your earliest convenience." I signed it simply, Captain Bella Mills, U.S. Army. I knew the name Anderson Defense would be the bait. The rank of captain would, I hoped, be the hook that set my message apart from the usual crank calls and conspiracy theories he must receive every day. An hour later, a one-word reply appeared in my inbox. "Where?" We agreed to meet at the Old Ebbitt Grill, a D.C. institution just a stone's throw from the White House. It was the perfect location, a place so steeped in the city's history of back-channel deals and anonymous sources that our meeting would be utterly inconspicuous. The air inside smelled of old wood, brass polish, and secrets. I chose a booth in a dimly lit corner and was nursing a club soda when he arrived. Timothy Hayes looked exactly like his byline photo. In his mid-50s, with a tired slump to his shoulders that suggested too many deadlines and not enough sleep, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room with the practiced vigilance of a predator. He slid into the booth opposite me, not bothering with pleasantries. "Captain Mills," he said, his voice a low gravel. He looked me up and down, his skepticism almost a physical presence in the air. "I'll be honest with you. I get a dozen emails like yours a week. Disgruntled employees, jilted lovers, angry children. I don't have time for family squabbles." I held his gaze, my own expression unreadable. I hadn't come here to tell him my sob story. I wasn't looking for a shoulder to cry on. I was looking for a weapon. This isn't a family squabble, Mr. Hayes, I said, my voice even. I slid a small encrypted USB drive across the table. It stopped just short of his coffee cup. This is about soldiers who could die because of defective body armor. It's about hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars being funneled into offshore accounts. Open the file named Project Nightingale. You'll understand. He stared at the USB drive, then back at me. A long moment passed. He pulled a small specialized tablet from his briefcase, an air-gapped device completely disconnected from any network, and plugged in the drive. I watched his face as he read. It was a fascinating transformation. The initial mask of weary cynicism slowly dissolved. His eyebrows knitted together in concentration. Then, his jaw tightened. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a familiar fire, the righteous anger of a journalist who has just found the scent of a massive story. He scrolled through spreadsheets, scanned internal memos, and read the transcript of damning emails. Finally, he looked up from the screen. The man looking at me now was not the same one who had sat down 2 minutes earlier. "My God," he whispered, his voice hushed with the gravity of what he'd seen. This is a bombshell." For the first time since that horrible dinner, I felt a knot in my chest begin to loosen. I didn't have to plead my case. I didn't have to convince him. The facts spoke for themselves, cold, hard, and irrefutable. In that moment, he saw me not as a scorned daughter, but as a credible source. He saw me. He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "Captain, do you have any idea what you're doing? Who you're going up against? Howard Anderson doesn't just have money, he has this entire city in his pocket. He can make one phone call and have you buried so deep you'll never see the light of day again." I looked him straight in the eye, my resolve hardening like steel. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. That oath doesn't have a waiver for my father. That was it. That was the final piece he needed. A slow nod of understanding, of respect, passed between us. He was no longer just a reporter, and I was no longer just a source. We were allies. "All right, Captain," he said, closing the tablet. "I'm in." He extended a hand across the table. "But I need 3 days. I have to cross-verify some of these shell corporations and speak to a couple of my own sources deep inside the Pentagon. This has to be airtight." I shook his hand. It was a firm, solid grip. "In the meantime," he added, his eyes holding mine, "be careful. Your father is a powerful man, and if he gets even a whiff that you're talking to the press, he'll come after you with everything he's got." The meeting ended. As I walked out of the historic restaurant and onto the busy streets of D.C., I didn't feel alone anymore. I had found more than a journalist. I had found a brother in arms for the new war I was about to fight. And, that feeling of finally being heard, of having someone believe you when the people who were supposed to love you most turned their backs. That feeling is everything. If you believe that truth and courage are the most powerful weapons we have, please support this story by hitting the like button. And let me know in the comments by simply writing, "I stand with Bella." It means more than you know. In Sun Tzu's The Art of War, there's a principle. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. For 48 agonizing hours, I embraced that principle. I remained silent, inactive, and my silence drove the Andersons insane. They were used to controlling the narrative, to provoking a reaction they could then manipulate. My refusal to engage was a strategic move they couldn't comprehend, and it made them desperate. The first wave of their counteroffensive came from my mother. My phone screen lit up with a series of long, rambling text messages, each one a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. "Bella, darling, my heart is simply broken. Family is everything. Please don't let this stubbornness of yours destroy what little we have left." I read the words, devoid of any genuine emotion, and deleted them without replying. Next came Paige. She launched a social media campaign, posting a flood of perfectly curated photos from past family vacations on her Instagram. Pictures of them smiling on a yacht in the Hamptons, skiing in Aspen, all artfully cropped to exclude me. Each post was tagged with the nauseating hashtag Anderson Strong. It was a petty public erasure of my existence, designed to paint me as the outcast who never belonged in the first place. But the most insidious attack came from Kevin. He called, his voice a smug cocktail of condescension and feigned concern. "Hey, Bella," he started, as if we were just catching up. "Listen, I talked to Dad. He's disappointed, obviously. But he said he's willing to give you one last chance." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. "All you have to do," he continued, "is come see him. Apologize, sincerely. Tell him you made a mistake. Don't be an idiot and throw everything away over a little wounded pride." The offer of forgiveness was wrapped in an insult, a classic Anderson tactic. They offered a path back, but the toll was my dignity. I stayed silent. His tone shifted from patronizing to irritated. "Dad just wants you to come back to reality, Bella, to be a normal person, not some robot in a uniform playing a little soldier game." He hung up. The psychological warfare was escalating, but the next move from my father was far more dangerous. He began to leverage his network, probing my defenses. He made a call to a retired 3-star general who sat on the Anderson Defense Board of Directors. A friendly inquiry. A few hours later, I was summoned to my commanding officer's office. Colonel Wallace was a tough but fair man, a leader I respected immensely. He gestured for me to sit down, his expression uncharacteristically neutral. "Captain Mills," he began, his voice calm. "Just checking in. How was your leave? Everything all right on the home front?" The question was casual, but the weight behind it was immense. It was a warning shot, fired from my father's cannon, but delivered by my own command. My father was testing the walls of my fortress, seeing if he could use the very institution I served to put pressure on me. I understood the message perfectly. "I can reach you anywhere." "Everything's fine, sir," I replied, my voice steady. "Just some family matters to attend to." "Understood," he said, his eyes searching mine. "Let me know if you need anything." I was dismissed, but the chill of that conversation lingered. The battlefield was expanding. Just as I was processing this new threat, my phone rang again. It was Timothy Hayes. The moment I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. The confident, determined tone from our meeting was gone, replaced by a tense urgency. "Bella, we have a problem," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "My editor just got a call from a high-level source at the Pentagon. They're trying to kill the story before it even runs." My stomach tightened. "What are they saying?" "They're painting you as a disgruntled daughter on a personal vendetta," he said, the frustration clear in his voice. "They're claiming you're abusing your security clearance and fabricating evidence to get back at your father for cutting you off. It's a smear campaign, and they're aiming it straight at your credibility as an officer, and mine as a journalist." My father wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was attacking the integrity of the Washington Post. He was attacking my honor as a soldier. He was willing to burn everything to the ground to protect his empire. The war was no longer being fought in the shadows. It was spilling out into the open on multiple fronts. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another call. Kevin's name flashed on the screen. This time, there was no pretense of concern. His voice was cold and commanding, a direct order. "Dad wants to see you," he barked. "Tomorrow, lunch, Army and Navy Club. Don't be late." He hung up before I could respond. The choice of venue was a deliberate power play. The Army and Navy Club, a historic bastion of military and political influence in D.C. It was his home turf, a place where his name carried immense weight, where portraits of decorated generals would look down on me as he delivered his ultimatum. I stood there, feeling the pressure from all sides, the family's emotional manipulation, the military's implicit warning, the media's potential retreat. It was a coordinated assault, designed to isolate and overwhelm me. They expected me to break. They expected me to crawl back, begging for the forgiveness Kevin had offered. I looked at my copy of The Art of War sitting on my nightstand. Sun Tzu wrote, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. My father had made a critical error. By attacking me on all fronts, he had revealed his own desperation. He thought he was laying a trap. He didn't realize he was giving me a battlefield of my own choosing. A defensive posture was no longer an option. It was time to go on the offensive. I picked up the phone and sent a text back to Kevin, one that he would show my father. It contained just 4 words. Tell him I'll be there. At West Point, they teach you about 2 kinds of courage. Physical courage is the ability to face fire and danger without flinching. But they also teach you about moral courage, the infinitely harder and rarer kind. It's the will to stand up for what is right, especially when you are facing pressure from your superiors, your peers, or in my case, your own blood. As I walked into the main dining room of the Army and Navy Club, I could feel the weight of that lesson settling on my shoulders. The air in the club was hushed, reverent. The walls were covered with oil paintings of decorated generals, their stern gazes seeming to follow me as I walked across the plush oriental rug. The clinking of silverware on fine china was the only sound. I had made a deliberate choice in my attire. I wore my Army Green Service uniform, the iconic pinks and greens that echo the heritage of the greatest generation. This was not a family lunch. This was a meeting between a United States Army officer and a defense contractor. My father was exactly where I knew he would be, at a large circular table in the dead center of the room. It was the most visible seat in the house, a strategic position. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by several influential figures, a retired admiral, a well-known lobbyist, and a senior partner from a K Street law firm. He was using them as a backdrop, a silent audience to witness my surrender. He saw me approaching and a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already won. He didn't stand up. He simply gestured with one hand toward the empty chair opposite him, a silent command for a subordinate to take her seat. As I walked the final few feet, a ripple of awareness spread through the room. Conversations quieted, heads turned. Every eye was on us. My father had his stage. I sat down, my back perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly in my lap. He began, his voice laced with the false magnanimity of a benevolent king addressing a wayward subject. Bella, he said, his tone carrying just enough to be overheard by the neighboring tables. I am deeply disappointed in you. Your behavior has been reckless and childish. He took a sip of water. But I am your father, and I am prepared to overlook this youthful indiscretion if you are prepared to be sensible. He laid out his terms of surrender. First, I was to make a public statement retracting any unfounded allegations I might have made. Second, I was to issue a formal apology to the family for the distress I had caused. Third, I was to seriously consider an honorable discharge from the Army to return to the real world. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping into a tone of condescending pity. You've played your little soldier game long enough, Bella, he said, the words sharp enough to cut. It's time to grow up. Every word was a calculated strike designed to belittle my career, invalidate my choices, and reassert his absolute authority in a public forum. He was using the presence of these powerful men as a vice, expecting the social pressure to crush my resolve. I listened. I let him finish his entire speech without interruption. My face remained a neutral mask. The lecture on moral courage at the academy taught that true strength isn't in the volume of your voice, but in the clarity of your conviction. When he was done, a heavy silence fell over the table. He leaned back, a triumphant glint in his eye, waiting for my inevitable capitulation. My voice, when I finally spoke, was not loud, but it was clear, cold, and carried no trace of a tremor. I didn't come here to listen to your terms, I said, my eyes locked on his. I came here to present you with the facts. I didn't raise my voice. I simply began to report. Contract number W56HZV 17C0065. I began, the designation rolling off my tongue with clinical precision. A 5-year agreement to supply supplemental armor plating for the Humvee fleet. Anderson Defense replaced the specified mil-spec steel with a cheaper, substandard alternative from an uncertified supplier in Shanghai. My father's smile faltered. The lobbyist beside him shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I continued, my tone unchanging. The substitution saved Anderson Defense approximately $1.2 million on the initial production run alone, a significant boost to your third-quarter profit margins. I paused, letting the words sink in, then delivered the final, devastating payload. My question for you is this. How many American lives is that $1.2 million worth to you? Sir? The color drained from Howard Anderson's face. It was quickly replaced by a furious, mottled red that crept up his neck. The men at the surrounding tables, who had been pretending not to listen, were now openly staring and whispering amongst themselves. My father lost his composure. The mask of the calm, powerful patriarch shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered man underneath. He leaned across the table, his voice a harsh, guttural whisper. "You have no idea what you're doing," he hissed, his eyes blazing with fury. "I can make one phone call. One, and your entire career will evaporate. You will never be promoted. You'll be reassigned to some godforsaken desk in North Dakota until you quit. You will be forgotten." I stood up slowly, my chair making no sound on the thick carpet. I looked down at him, at this man who was no longer my father, but simply the enemy. "You made a mistake," I said, my voice now as hard and unyielding as the steel he should have been using. "You think you can threaten me with your power. You think you can make me afraid." I looked him dead in the eye. "But you forgot something. My loyalty isn't to you. It isn't to the Anderson name. My loyalty is to my country and to the soldiers I serve with. You declared war on the wrong person. Have you ever had a moment where you knew you had to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost? That feeling of drawing a line in the sand is one of the most terrifying and liberating moments in a person's life. If you support Bella's courage in this moment, please hit that like button and show your support in the comments by simply writing the words, "Draw the line." I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving Howard Anderson sitting there, speechless and exposed, in the deafening silence of his own battlefield. Howard Anderson did not wait long to retaliate. He was a creature of overwhelming force, and having been publicly challenged, he responded with the full, crushing weight of his empire. My declaration of war was met with a declaration of his own. By 4 o'clock that same afternoon, it arrived. A 10-page letter, delivered by courier directly to Colonel Wallace's office, with copies sent to the Army Command Staff at the Pentagon. The letterhead was from one of the most powerful and expensive law firms on K Street. It was a meticulously crafted legal assault, designed not to win in a real court, but to destroy me within the military justice system. The letter formally accused Captain Bella Mills of multiple violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Article 134, Conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Article 108, Misuse of government property, citing my encrypted laptop. And the most damning of all, Article 133, Conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman, or in my case, a lady. They twisted my actions into a narrative of a vengeful, unstable officer using her position to carry out a personal vendetta. My father was weaponizing the very code of honor I lived by, turning the Army's language and its rigid procedures against me. It was a brilliant, ruthless move. Colonel Wallace summoned me to his office. The neutral expression from our last meeting was gone, replaced by a grim, weary resignation. He held the thick document in his hand as if it were radioactive. "Captain," he said, his voice heavy. He didn't ask me to sit. "I have received a formal complaint from counsel representing Anderson Defense." He slid the letter across his desk. "You and I both know this is likely nonsense, but given the nature of the allegations and the influence of the complainant, my hands are tied. Process must be followed." I stood at attention, my eyes fixed on a point just over his shoulder. I knew what was coming. "Effective immediately," he continued, the words sounding like a death sentence. "I am obligated to open an Army Regulation 15-6 investigation into these claims. During this period, you are temporarily relieved of all command duties and operational responsibilities." He paused, and his next words hit me like a physical blow. "I need you to surrender your service weapon and your top-level security credentials." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just sidelining me, he was disarming me, stripping me of the symbols of my authority and my identity. For a soldier, this was the ultimate vote of no confidence, a public branding as a risk, a pariah. I moved without a word. I unholstered my Sig Sauer M17, engaged the safety, and placed it on his desk. Then I unclipped the ID from my belt, the common access card that gave me entry to the most secure facilities in the nation, and placed it beside the weapon. You'll be reassigned to administrative duties in the basement annex pending the outcome of the investigation, he said, unable to meet my eyes. Captain, He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging between us. I believe you. I'm sorry. But it didn't matter. The system was in motion, and it was grinding me down. My new office was a windowless 10 by 10 concrete box in the sub-basement, smelling faintly of old paper and disinfectant. My new job was to collate decades-old supply manifests, mind-numbing, meaningless work designed to isolate and demoralize me. My colleagues, men and women I'd served with and trusted, now averted their eyes when I passed them in the hallway. They weren't hostile, but they were cautious. I was under investigation. I was now a potential problem, and in the military, you keep your distance from problems. I had never felt so utterly alone. I was an outcast in my own family, and now I was a prisoner in the institution I had dedicated my life to. As soon as I was alone in my concrete cell, I sent a single encrypted text to Timothy Hayes. They made their move. I've been relieved of duty and am under a 15-6. He called me back within minutes. His voice, unlike Colonel Wallace's, was not weary. It was electric, filled with a hunter's adrenaline. This is it, Bella, he said, his voice low and intense. This is the final confirmation. He's made his biggest mistake. Mistake? I asked, my own voice sounding hollow. Timothy, he's destroying my career. No, don't you see? He countered, the excitement rising in his voice. This proves it's not a family squabble. This is what a guilty man does when he's terrified. This is a massive overreaction, and it gives us the final piece we need. He just confirmed our entire story. My editor is on board. He sees it now. We're going to print. I felt a surge of hope, a small pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. When? 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, Timothy said, his voice grimly determined. Front page of the Post, above the fold. Digital and print. Get ready, Captain. Hell is about to break loose. My father's attack, meant to be the killing blow, had just lit the fuse on the bomb he was so desperately trying to defuse. That night, I sat in my silent apartment, the city lights of Arlington glittering outside. I felt a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. My family had cast me out. The army, my sanctuary, had locked me in a cage. I was adrift. I found myself thinking about the story of Hugh Thompson, Jr., the helicopter pilot at My Lai. He saw a horrific wrong being committed by his own side and intervened. He landed his helicopter between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians, ordering his crew to fire on the Americans if they continued the massacre. For years, he was treated as a traitor. His career stalled, his name whispered with contempt. But he never wavered, because he knew he had done the right thing. Decades later, he was recognized as a hero. I looked out my window toward the Potomac, where the Lincoln Memorial glowed, a steady beacon of white marble in the dark. I remembered why I had joined the army in the first place. It wasn't for glory, and it certainly wasn't for money. It was for a simple, almost naive belief in the ideals that Memorial represented: duty, honor, and a nation where no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. I knew what was coming tomorrow would be a firestorm. But as I sat there, isolated and disarmed, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Whatever happened next, I had done the right thing. I had honored my oath. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my window, watching the city lights, feeling like a soldier in a trench waiting for the whistle to signal a charge over the top. At precisely 6 hours, my phone lit up with a notification from the Washington Post app. The moment had arrived. The bomb detonated with silent, digital precision. The headline was stark, brutal, and beautiful. Anderson Defense Empire accused of defrauding Pentagon of hundreds of millions, endangering troops. Timothy's article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It was meticulous, fact-checked, and supported by scanned invoices, damning email chains, and expert analysis. He laid out the entire scheme, the inflated costs, the shell corporations, and the unforgivable sin of the substandard steel. My evidence was the skeleton. His reporting was the flesh and blood that brought the monster to life. The story didn't just make a splash, it created a tsunami. Before the sun was fully up, it was the lead story on every news aggregator. By 7 a.m., it was being discussed on CNN, with retired generals expressing their shock and disgust. By 8 a.m., anchors on MSNBC were demanding immediate congressional hearings. The story spread like wildfire across social media. The hashtag #Anderson Defense, a torrent of public outrage. Trading for Anderson Defense stock was halted before the market even opened, but the pre-market indicators showed a catastrophic collapse. My father's empire, built on decades of backroom deals and intimidation, was being dismantled in a matter of hours by the one thing it could not withstand: the truth. And then, my family began to panic. My phone, which had been silent for days, suddenly exploded. A barrage of missed calls and furious text messages. The first call I answered was from Paige. She was hysterical, her voice a shrill, sobbing mess. "You ruined us," she shrieked into the phone. "You destroyed this family. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied?" I listened to her accusations, her complete inability to see the reality of the situation. She wasn't angry about the fraud or the endangerment of soldiers. She was angry that her comfortable, privileged life was imploding. I said nothing. I simply ended the call. Next was Kevin. He didn't even bother with a greeting. "You'll pay for this, you bitch," he screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and fear. "I'll make sure you pay." His threats, once carrying the weight of the Anderson name, were now just the pathetic howls of a dethroned prince. The foundation of his power was crumbling around him, and all he had left was empty rage. A few hours later, I got a call from the front gate at Fort Myer. The guards reported that a hysterical man and woman in a Porsche were demanding to see the traitor, causing a scene. I told them to deny access and escort them off the property. I turned my phone off. Their noise, their chaos, their panic, it couldn't touch me anymore. My silence was the most powerful response I could give. I was the calm eye of the hurricane they had created. The shockwaves reached my basement office shortly after 9. A young lieutenant I barely knew came to my door, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and respect. "Captain Mills," he said, "Colonel Wallace needs to see you, right away." I walked through the same hallways where I had been ignored just the day before. Now, people stopped what they were doing to look at me. They weren't looks of suspicion anymore. They were looks of profound respect. Officers nodded as I passed. A sergeant major gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible thumbs up. When I entered Colonel Wallace's office, the change was immediate and absolute. He stood up from behind his desk. He gestured for me to sit in the chair reserved for guests, not the one for subordinates. He then walked over to the coffee pot in the corner and poured a cup, handing it to me himself. My weapon and my security credentials were sitting on the corner of his desk. He sat down, not as a commander addressing a subordinate under investigation, but as one officer addressing another. "Captain Mills," he began, his voice filled with a formal, deep-seated respect. "The AR-15-6 investigation against you has been terminated, effective immediately." He pushed my M17 and my ID card across the desk toward me. "Bella," he said, using my first name for the first time, "what you did, it took an extraordinary amount of moral courage. The United States Army is proud of you." I felt a surge of emotion so powerful it almost took my breath away. It was the validation I had spent my entire life craving, not from my father, not from my mother, but from a man who embodied the very honor and integrity I had sworn to uphold. It was a homecoming. The day ended as it had begun, with a phone call. It was late in the evening, and an unknown blocked number appeared on my screen. I knew who it was. I answered and waited in silence. The voice on the other end was almost unrecognizable. The booming, arrogant tone of Howard Anderson was gone. replaced by the weak, desperate rasp of a defeated old man. Bella, he started, his voice strained. Bella, please, you have to call it off. Tell them it was a misunderstanding, a mistake. I listened to the sound of his world collapsing. I'll give you everything, he pleaded, the words tumbling out in a pathetic rush. The will, the trust funds, your name back on everything, anything you want, just make it stop. He thought he could still buy me. He thought he could put a price on my honor. After everything, he still didn't understand who I was. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting him sit with the consequences of his own actions. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm and final. It's too late, sir. I ended the call before he could say another word, and then I finally turned my phone off for the night. The battle was over. I had won. Winning a war doesn't mean the noise stops. In some ways, it only gets louder. In the weeks following the article, the federal government moved with astonishing speed. I'd watch the evening news and see the consequences of my actions play out in high definition. FBI agents in tactical gear raiding the Anderson Defense Headquarters in McLean, Virginia, carrying out box after box of documents. IRS auditors swarming the corporate offices, a federal judge issuing an order to freeze all Anderson family assets. The machine of justice, once so slow and distant, was now a relentless force. The climax came on a Tuesday morning. I saw it on CNN. Howard Anderson, my father, was led out of our family home in handcuffs. He looked small. Stripped of his tailored suits and his air of authority, he was just a tired, frightened old man. The image didn't bring me the savage thrill of victory I might have once expected. There was no elation, no triumphant surge of, I told you so. There was only a profound, quiet emptiness. It was the feeling of a long, painful chapter of my life finally, irrevocably, coming to a close. With their power and money gone, the Andersons who had once cast me out now came begging for me to let them back in. Their desperation was a tidal wave. My mother left rambling, tearful voicemails, not of apology, but of complaint. She lamented the loss of their home, the cancellation of her credit cards, the humiliation she faced at her country club. Her sorrow was purely for her own lost status. Paige took a different approach. She sent long, rambling emails that were a bizarre mix of accusation and pleading. One paragraph would blame me for destroying the family. The next would beg me to do something to save our father. It was a fire hose of guilt, blame, and frantic appeals. You've always been jealous of what we had, she wrote in one. And then, sentences later, Bella, please, he's your father. You can't let them do this to him. You have to talk to the prosecutors, tell them it's a mistake. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were only sorry for the consequences they now had to face. I read the emails, I listened to the voicemails, and I never once replied. My silence was no longer a strategy. It was a boundary. A solid, impenetrable wall I was building around my own peace. There's a prayer they sometimes mention in recovery groups, the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I realized I could not change my family, but I could change how I allowed them to affect me. The only person I agreed to see was my grandmother. I drove out to her small, charming house in Annapolis, Maryland. We sat in her backyard garden, surrounded by the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. The late afternoon sun was warm on my face. She took my hand, her grip still surprisingly strong, her eyes filled with tears. I am so proud of you, Bella, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You did what no one else in this family ever had the courage to do. You chose honor over money. Sitting there with her, I understood something profound about forgiveness. I had always thought it meant reconciliation, letting people back into your life. But I realized that wasn't true. I could forgive my family for my own sake. I could let go of the anger and the bitterness that had been a poison in my own heart for years, without ever having to welcome their toxicity back into my world. Forgiveness wasn't about them, it was about me. It was about my own liberation. 3 months later, the federal trial began. I was called as the prosecution's star witness. As I walked into the U.S. District Courthouse, I felt a strange calm. I wore my full-dress uniform, the same one my mother had called a trinket. Today, it was my shield and my sword. I took the witness stand, raised my right hand, and swore an oath to tell the truth. Across the courtroom, at the defendant's table, sat my father. He was dressed in an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit, the vibrant color a stark contrast to his pale, haggard face. He looked like a stranger, a ghost from another life. He refused to meet my eyes. The prosecuting attorney walked me through the evidence, piece by piece, the inflated invoices, the shell corporations, the substandard steel. I answered each question calmly and factually, my voice steady, my testimony backed by the mountain of data I'd compiled. Then came the cross-examination. My father's defense attorney, a famously aggressive lawyer from a top DC firm, approached me with a predatory smile. His strategy was clear. If you can't challenge the evidence, you attack the witness. "Captain Mills," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Isn't it true that just weeks before you provided this information to the press, your father had you disinherited?" "Yes, that's correct," I said. "And isn't it true," he continued, pacing in front of the jury box, "that you felt betrayed, angry, humiliated?" I was disappointed in his decision. "Yes." "Disappointed?" the lawyer scoffed. "Or were you vengeful? Isn't this whole thing, this entire spectacular trial, nothing more than the petty revenge of a jealous daughter who was cut off from the family fortune?" He had thrown down the gauntlet. He was trying to reframe the entire narrative, to paint me as the villain, just as my family had done at the dinner table. I did not look at him. I did not look at my father. I turned my head and looked directly at the 12 men and women in the jury box. I looked at their faces, ordinary Americans, people who pay their taxes and believe in the rule of law. And I spoke to them. My voice was clear, firm, and filled with the conviction of my own truth. "Sir," I said, addressing the lawyer but holding the jury's gaze, "when I took my oath as an officer, I swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic." I paused, letting the weight of those words fill the silent courtroom. That oath has no family exception. After 6 long weeks, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Howard Anderson was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His top executives received similar sentences. Anderson Defense, once a titan of the industry, was declared bankrupt, its remaining assets seized and liquidated to reimburse the U.S. government. The Anderson name, once a symbol of untouchable power in Washington, D.C., was now synonymous with disgrace. For me, the verdict wasn't a victory to be celebrated. It was a conclusion. It was the final heavy period at the end of a long and painful sentence. The weight I had carried on my back for my entire life, the constant grinding pressure to prove my worth to people who were incapable of seeing it, was finally lifted. I felt quiet. The aftermath in my own life was the polar opposite of the Anderson family's downfall. My actions, which had briefly made me a pariah, were now lauded throughout the military as a textbook case of moral courage and integrity. I received a commendation from the Secretary of the Army himself. 6 months later, I was given an early promotion to major. With the promotion came a new assignment. I was transferred to a special task force at the Pentagon, a unit specifically created to investigate fraud and corruption within the defense procurement system. In a turn of perfect, poignant irony, I was now in a position of power to prevent men exactly like my father from ever succeeding again. I had taken the pain they had inflicted on me and forged it into a shield to protect other soldiers and the American taxpayers. My work had purpose. But the most profound change wasn't in my career. It was in my life. I finally understood the true meaning of family. It wasn't about blood. It was about loyalty, respect, and shared sacrifice. I found my real family in the bonds of brotherhood and sisterhood with my fellow soldiers. I became a mentor to young officers, especially women who were navigating the same challenging path I had walked. I made sure they knew they had an advocate, someone who would have their back, no matter what. My holidays changed, too. I no longer spent Thanksgiving in a tense, formal dining room, pretending to be grateful. Instead, I spent it at Colonel Wallace's house, surrounded by other soldiers who couldn't be with their own families. We'd eat turkey, watch football, and share stories and laughter that were genuine and easy. It was a loud, chaotic, and beautiful belonging that was built on shared experience, not on a shared last name. And every few weeks, my Grandma Mills would drive up from Annapolis, her car smelling of cinnamon and sugar, bringing me a fresh batch of her chocolate chip cookies, a taste of unconditional love that never failed to make me feel whole. One afternoon, about a year after the trial, I took a walk through Arlington National Cemetery. It was a crisp, clear autumn day. I walked slowly among the endless, perfectly aligned rows of white headstones. I wasn't there to mourn, but to remember, to reconnect with my purpose. Each stone represented a life given in service, a testament to the real meaning of the loyalty I had fought to uphold. Standing there, amidst the silent sacrifice, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and peace. My war was over. A few days later, I was standing in my new office at the Pentagon. From my window, I had a clear view of the Washington Monument, rising sharp and proud against the blue sky. My desk was organized and uncluttered. There were no pictures of the Andersons. There was no trace of that part of my life. Instead, in a simple silver frame, sat a single photograph. It was of me and my new team, taken just a week earlier after we had successfully shut down a fraudulent contractor. We were all standing in front of a helicopter, squinting in the sun, our faces tired but smiling. We were a motley crew, a former infantryman, a data scientist, a grizzled warrant officer, but we were a unit. We were a family. I had lost the family I was born into, the one defined by blood and a powerful name. But in its place, I had gained so much more. I had reclaimed my honor. I had built a career with profound meaning. And I had forged a new family, bound by the sacred principles that West Point had etched into my soul: duty, honor, country. I realized then that a true legacy isn't something you inherit. It's not about the name on your birth certificate or the money in your trust fund. A true legacy is something you build, one honorable action at a time. I was no longer the disowned daughter of Howard Anderson. I was Major Bella Mills of the United States Army. I was the guardian of the Mills name, a name I had chosen and had lived to honor. I had completed my mission. And that was the greatest victory of all. Looking at that picture on my desk, I'm reminded that the most important name we carry isn't the one we're given, but the one we earn through our actions. My war was fought in boardrooms and courtrooms, but I know many of you have fought your own quiet battles in living rooms and at holiday dinners. It takes immense courage to draw your own boundaries and define your own honor. If my journey has resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of forging your own path, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are so many stories of strength and resilience waiting to be told, and together we can give them a voice. Thank you for listening.